Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our US Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon, the first of 2026. Today, we have a fascinating conversation in store for you about political strategies and effective insights that can be gained from the experience of someone who has run numerous successful campaigns. First, we are joined by our esteemed panel of Transhumanist Party officers, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, and our Director of Community and Citizen Science, as well as 2024 Vice Presidential candidate Daniel Tweed. And our special guest today is Adam Czajkowski. He is a managing partner at Tallac Strategies, a Reno-based political consulting and public relations firm. With experience working on political campaigns in multiple states, he is well-versed in fundraising tactics, field strategy, communications, coalition building, and campaign management. He specializes in working with values-driven political candidates, nonprofit organizations, businesses, and labor groups. Through his services, he has contributed to the successful elections of multiple candidates in Nevada at the state and local levels. So, Adam, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you as our guest today. And tell us a bit more about your background, your experience in running political campaigns, what you have learned from it, and what you think a minor political party, such as the US Transhumanist Party, can derive from your experiences. How can an organization like the USTP succeed in American politics today?
Classic online mistake there. So thanks, Gennady, and the rest of the Transhumanist Party for having me. It's a pleasure. Well, I think you told me that I have roughly 20, 30 minutes to give you an extensive background on where I came from. When I think about connecting with someone politically, it usually that wants to go deeper into politics, it usually goes from like, what's your earliest moments of politics? What kind of pushed you into the ecosystem? And for me, it was when I was born in 1984, and when the Republicans took the House in the United States U.S. Congress, and I think it was 94. I was 10 years old. It might have been 96, so I would have been 12. We were listening to an NPR story with my dad. You know, I am 10 years old, 12 years old, so I don't, know much about it, although social studies was always my best subject. And I asked my dad what the difference between a Democrat and a Republican was, and he said, Democrats write checks and Republicans cash them. When I tell people this, there's these wheels that turn and don't stop. It was just a nonsense statement that I remember, 30 years later. It just frustrated me, so I ended up getting off of my computer technology kind of track, was kind of immersed myself into all things social sciences, in particular politics. I ended up studying political science at Indiana University in Indianapolis, known as IUPUI. And after that, graduated right into the Great Recession, and I didn't really have a model for how to engage in politics. I came from a working class blue collar family where, my family always voted, but it wasn't like they engaged in politics outside of that. So there wasn't a model of, these are the steps to get to where you were. I was just graduated from college, one of the first people in my family to do so. So was just nervous about, finding a job where I could, make a living and wear a suit every day. And that was not happening with, 15% unemployment, especially for a 23-year-old. So that was 2006, 2007 when that was going on. Took a few years where I was not really engaged in politics. I did my first political experience on a campaign was in 2008. I walked doors for President Obama in Colorado. I had moved out to Colorado in October of 2008, and it was just an opportune time. Colorado at that point was a swing state. And then I was a Republican at the time, actually. I'm a Democrat now. My client load I have now are two nonpartisans, are a nonpartisan, a Republican, and two Democrats. So I have, kind of an interesting splattering of the political spectrum this year. But so in Denver is when I first engaged in politics. I ended up moving to Phoenix. Spent a summer on Martha's Vineyard, which is a very political place, but I was not engaging in politics at that time. I was bartending, and I had made a lot of money on the island, and came back and said, "Hey, look, I'm just gonna immerse myself into politics, and if it doesn't work out, I'll go back to the island and make a lot of money, and we can kind of figure out where the career goes from there." But so when I got back, it was at this point now the very beginning of 2011. And job search was not going very well for me. Gabby Giffords had just got the assassination attempt, right, was all going on at this time. And so I walked over to the local Arizona Democratic Party and was like, "Hey, look, you don't have to pay me for 6 months. I'm willing to be as helpful as I possibly could." And I showed up early, was always the last one to leave, and asked lots of questions along the way in exchange for my time. And so really immersed myself into the political tactics and strategy down there. When I was just starting out, Senator Gallego, who was just political consultant Gallego, basically was doing what I was doing. He was helping local candidates and the party, unions, that kind of thing. And then that was prior to him running for the state legislature, and then eventually U.S. Congress, and now you all know him as a U.S. Senator. But after all of the political operatives were done for the day at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, we would go down to the local bar and just exchange notes. And as much as people would answer my questions, I would pepper them for months and months and months. And I started out in field, which is a very typical place for people to start out. It's basically volunteer management, communicating with voters, knocking doors, making phone calls, managing volunteers, those sorts of things. And then I had a mentor that was in the finance department that basically taught me that, we're really asking for resources, whether you're in finance and you're asking for financial resources, or if you're on the field side, you're asking for time. All of it involves kind of basic economic principles. It's a scarce resource. There's not unlimited supply of these. You can't spend $1 in two different places. Once it's spent, it's spent. You can't do the same thing with an hour, a volunteer hour. And then if you apply that to candidate management, there's some of that same scarcity concepts that apply. Where's the best place for the candidate to be? What's the best use of time? What's the time budget, the schedule, the calendar for the candidate? So those concepts that I had learned in my first race in Arizona, it started to kind of apply to different political buckets until it really is the holistic campaign atmosphere. And then even applying those tactics to the broader political spectrum. So whether it was in lobbying or whether it was in policy advocacy, it's a basic human connection business, explaining yourself, communicating, connecting with what people's motivations are, what they want to achieve, community organizing, coalition building, activating value partners, shared political power. So it all applies to the political world, those same kind of tactics that I learned then. So I first started on the Phoenix mayor's race. It was in a weird section of the calendar. It was kind of a great place for me to start out fresh. It was a Tea Party wave in November of 2010. Democratic political operatives were really disheartened in Arizona. They worked very hard and won nothing. I was able to come in fresh as a freshman, never experiencing the pain of that loss. Lots of energy. I was still young at the time, 25, 26 years old. it was, so I was able to sink my teeth into this Phoenix mayor's race. Now Phoenix mayors are elected in the normal election cycle that we're all familiar with. But at that time, it was Phoenix mayor's races were odd years in November. And then also Tempe mayor's races and Tempe municipal races were in March of the following year. So I went an August primary, a November general, and this is all in a non-election year. And then going into the general election year, which would have been 2012, I had a March primary, a May general, and then a August primary, November general. I had actually ended up in a runoff election in December. I was working on the New Orleans or a city council race in New Orleans, and they use a hybrid of the French system. So for whatever reason, I wasn't as involved in the general as I was in the primary. But if you take a plurality but not a majority of votes, then you go on to December. So that year, which was really my I'd been roughly involved for about a year, maybe 13 months. I had got the opportunity to experience basically 5 get out the vote operations by the time you figure all of these one-off municipal election cycles. And so it was a great way for me to really solidify a lot of those concepts and tactics that I had learned. And then it was 2012. I ended up, I lost my first race, took on a congressional primary, ended up finishing 3rd out of 3, thought my career was over because I had, won 5-6 races prior to that. So I'm like, you lose a race, why would anyone ever want to work with you again? I thought that you had to win every race to continue participating. And that was a very silly and immature and naive thought. So I woke up the next day, I had an offer from President Obama's campaign in Florida, and then one up in Reno, Nevada from SEIU that was also working on the president's campaign. And that was prior to me waking up on Wednesday after that unsuccessful primary. So that thoroughly debunked that notion that if I lose a single race that I was damaged goods. So that brought me up to Reno, and I thought I was only going to stay up here for a couple of months, go back down to Arizona, continue building what I had built down there, but ended up meeting a woman, falling in love, moving up here, breaking up. But anyway, what did stick was not the relationship, but my geographic base here in Reno. When I came up here full time, it was the end of 2013. After I'd worked the municipal race in Arizona again, I went back and forth for a while, for about a year. I was committed to doing a municipal race, but even before I had moved up here for the SEIU job. And so when I moved back here, I ended up working on Affordable Care Act enrollment in the exchange as I was, the recession was still kind of in full bloom here. And I was just wanted to take a job, and this was kind of adjacent to politics. There was the firm that I worked for with SEIU was also doing the enrollment and outreach for the enrollment for the Affordable Care Act. So I did that for a year or two, and then got that company that I was working for, they ended up closing their Reno operation. So I thought I would start my own political consulting business up here. That would have been that would have been in late 2015 going into the 2016 cycle. So we do everything from conceptualizing a campaign plan. Hey, what should I run for? What does it take? What are the resources I'm going to need? What should I be doing? When should I be doing it? We do that all the way from fundraising to communications plan to I'll say a scaffolding design of mail and digital that I turn over to artists that end up producing that. We target that. Data analysis, and then finally all the way through election day postmortem, and then even into the policy phase that hopefully comes after you win, and that you're engaging and making public policy for some jurisdiction. So yeah, I've done a little bit of policy work down in Carson City, some stuff with the city of Reno. I've done some lobbying for some environmental groups, some businesses, but basically it's probably 80% campaigns and election work, 10% lobbying, and 10% policy. So although my first legislative session down in Carson City, where I went down in January, February of this year, definitely fell in love with that. That was very exciting, something new, something adjacent to what I typically do. I wasn't lost in what was going on, but it was a completely new process. And I love that refreshing feeling of not having competency where you get to learn. And I think I tell young political professionals that freshman year is a very valuable tool. You know you have to work hard, and if you embrace that kind of working hard, being humble, learning, and you don't have the ego of that the terror of success that kind of plagues people, because every moment in politics is different, and it's different based upon the geography and the circumstance you're in. So taking that baggage of victory in the past can hinder you going forward. I think one of my most successful campaigns was my freshman year, just because, like I said, I haven't worked that hard ever in my life. I knew I didn't know anything. I knew I was behind. I knew I needed to catch up. And with all of those kind of concepts swirling in my head, I was able to do very, very good work. And because I wasn't, I had no clue what good looked like. So I just, kept on running as hard, as fast as I could, until by the time it was obvious that I was doing extremely well, it was so late in the game. I had already put so many points on the board, and I like I said, I just had no clue what good looked like. So I really did do as good as I possibly could, which was sufficient to win this very competitive city council district that led to Greg Stanton's win of the Phoenix mayor's race. So yeah, I think that's a pretty comprehensive where I've been. I could talk about where I've been and why I was there for another couple hours, but I think that was probably an appropriate baseline. If anyone wants to, tease any more information out of my background, I would be happy to answer that. But I think that's probably a pretty good space to set aside for who I am. Gennady, you had mentioned that you were interested in basically what can minor political parties do to further, their political interests. It was very interesting. When I was in Carson City, we have a party here in Nevada called the American Independent Party, and they a large part of their success is that people think that they are registering as nonpartisans. We have a local journalist here, Gennady, and I have talked about this. And they think that they're registering as a third party or a non-party candidate. It's actually an official political party with just a deceiving name. But they did one thing in Carson City that I thought was very helpful. They had a lobbyist. She wasn't paid. She wasn't, super shiny, well polished, kind of Ivy League graduate in a $3,000 suit. But she was down there and she made public comment, and she participated and said, "Hey, look, I'm from the American Independent Party, and this is, and this is how I feel." And she was generally respectful, although I didn't agree with much of what she said. But it definitely put them on my radar, and I think it put the party on the radar for everybody that was involved, from the lobbying corps to the legislators, potentially the governor, the media. And I think it's a very good PR opportunity that I watched her take advantage of. Now, like I said, she's retired. She's a political animal. She could spend a lot of time down there, and she was down there. She probably did the party, $100,000 of pro bono work by going down there. But I found that was pretty effective at her participating. And I think participating, is the most broad philosophy that I could say that is an effective strategy. Writing op-eds, speaking in public comment, and the smaller the jurisdiction, I think the better, because you're going to stand out. Like if you were to call Mark Amodei, Senator Cortez Masto or something, you're going to be one data point among it's going to be noise because there's going to be so much data. But if you're making a public comment at a city council meeting or a school board meeting or all of that, you'll be one of four, one of five, and it's going to start to really, I think, kind of build some brand identity as to like that you exist, you're out here, you stand for something, you're organized and want to participate in politics, and you have something to offer. I think that's a very good tactic. Always, and I tell everybody, I do these interviews for UNR students, and you know, they mention data as a specific component question of their interviews for me. But I say, you know, as a general strategy, data. You know, I feel like, you know, I definitely do have political values that I care about, and you know, they're not really line item, you know, one way or the other. I'm fairly progressive when it comes to healthcare policy. And, you know, I'm pretty conservative when it comes to law and order issues sometimes. But I tell my candidates, I tell my clients, I was like, I don't have thoughts, I analyze data. And I've almost kind of embraced that so much that, you know, I got to make sure that my values core is still there, because now it's always just, what does the data say? What does the data say? What does the data say? So I would say that, as you know, for advice for any political organization, in particular a small political party, be obsessed with data. You know, everything else is just chatting at the bar about politics, and those conversations can be very fun. But I think that, you know, they have to be, you know, the data is what gives you the underwriting, what gives you the structure, you know, of your political tactic strategies, and ultimately I think should be your political values, although there's some variability to, you know, what data point do you value more than the other data point. But it really should be data backed when you're doing policy work or when you're doing strategy and tactics. Always data before you start, after you finish, and everything in between. I would say for a minor political party, what I would do is, so it's very, and I've talked to Gennady about this probably, you know, for more than a couple hours. So you have a national, if not international organization. I would, when I set a goal for a client, I like to say you need to have about a 50-50 shot of hitting it. If you have 100% shot of hitting your goal, it's just kind of a waypoint. You know, you're not really pushing anything. If you have a 4% chance of hitting your goal, that is a wish. That is not a goal. A proper goal should be missed 50% of the time and hit 50% of the time. So what I would do is, after looking at loads of data, I would say, look, with our national network, this feels like we have a 50% shot of winning this election. So I am going to leverage the power of the Transhumanist Party and all of the value partners that surround that. And when I find, after you know, reams and reams of data analysis, I'm going to find this 50-50 shot. I'm going to leverage the power of the Transhumanist Party, get this person elected if the coin flips the right way, and then I'm going to then reanalyze the system with that elected transhumanist as a leverage point, as a beachhead, and then I'm going to then find out what's the next race, or what are the next couple of races, if that's the case, after data analysis says that we have roughly a 50% shot of winning. And then we will continue to kind of leverage these victories until the opportunities in that 50-50 threshold start to grow and grow, until then you have successful governing coalitions. But I think, so you don't want to, you know, waste, it's political triage in my mind. You don't want to waste your time on races that you know you're going to win. You don't want to waste your time on races you know you want to lose. It's that middle triage component there, that if they receive treatment, then they will live, as opposed to the multiple gunshot wounds to the head where you're not going to live at all, or you're talking about a boo-boo or a bellyache where if the doctor does not engage with you, that you're still going to survive. And so, you know, I would find that triage point, that coin flip race. Hopefully, like I said, if the coin flips the right way, into a legislative win. Now, in multiple legislative wins. Now, that's how I would go on the campaign side. And then I provided you a little bit on the policy side. I think having a lobbying presence, the smaller the body, the better. That's a good way to influence policy, of course. When you're talking policy, all legislators are different. I would say predominantly, they would be driven by ego. That's not always the case. So we would have a lot of people come into my office in Carson City and talk about how we were the greatest people on earth and have the best win and how everyone loves you. And my legislator was like, cut the crap. Like, let's talk about what's right or wrong with this bill. But still, I think it's worthy to note that the egoic component of elected officials, you want to be respectful. You do want to say, you want to be kind and gentle with them when you're approaching that lobbying. But I think if you guys are coming with very good data, you guys you're being respectful. You are being sober with the kind of scale of what you're asking for, and you approach legislators, city council people. Like I said, the smaller the body, the better. I think that you could then bend public policy towards the whims of the Transhumanist Party. Now, does that mean that they are going to adopt 100% of what you want? No. But I think with those kind of thoughts in mind, you could bend it from, where you're at now, to a much higher level of where it could be. And I think, like I said, I don't know how much of transhumanist policy platform gets integrated into policy now, whether that's, 50% or 1% or 0%. But I do think that there's an opportunity to elevate that. And like I said, there's the electoral strategy. How do we get transhumanists elected? And I do think that, that there is, I really do feel like with the proper approach that you could have a cadre of elected transhumanists. They wouldn't necessarily be a senator from New Hampshire, a U.S. senator. But I do think that there's opportunities to elect third-party transhumanist candidates out there. And then on the other side, when it comes to inserting your policy preferences, I don't think you even need to have working majorities on a certain body to really start to bend public policy towards what you like. Now to dictate public policy, you probably need about a 2/3 majority on most bodies. But if you're willing to accept lower than a lower bar than dictating what policy is for one body or the other, then I think that, once you have a beachhead in an elected office, or even if you don't have a beachhead in elected office, I think there are opportunities to make political difference in policy as well. So I think that was the longest winded way I possibly could have answered your first question, Gennady.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and it was quite thorough, and we can do a lot to explore these themes further. Also, I appreciate your origin story and how you paired it with noteworthy historical developments that were occurring at that time, from the Republican victory during the year of your birth through the Great Recession, the Obama presidency, and how the political landscape essentially evolved alongside you. So that was quite fascinating to hear. Now, your discussion of the importance of data dovetails nicely with the virtual Enlightenment Salon we held last Sunday with David Primer, who is a friend of mine and a data scientist, who discussed the importance of prioritizing data over narratives and using data to test hypotheses, turning preconceived narratives into questions that could be tested using data. So I appreciate your confirmation of some of these insights. Our friend Daniel Tweed writes in the chat, we need to make data as open and transparent, as interoperable as we can, while Mike Lazine points out we still need to keep protections in place to avoid the data being biased or compromised. And I do have a question along these lines. When you gather data, of course, there's a balance to be struck. You want to gather enough information about the constituents to be able to reach them, and also enough information about people who might potentially assist a campaign as volunteers or as collaborators in some other capacity, but you also want to respect individual privacy. And I know you've even done essentially door knocking campaigns where you approach a person outside their home and ask them to support a given candidate. But of course, there's a risk there of annoying somebody, turning off a potential voter. So how do you essentially achieve that balance? How do you walk that fine line between getting enough information and not frustrating people?
Okay, so there's always this fear. You'll always have candidates. I just dealt with it yesterday. We're laying out a door knocking operation, and he was like, "So we're not going to people twice, right? Because we're talking about basically what I like to think about when it comes to field. You have your universe, which in this case was 5,000 doors, and then there's 1.3 voters per door. It ended up being like I think 3,800 doors." And I told them, in a perfect world, we will what I call saturation. One attempt where you go all the way through is that is going to be one pass. Full saturation is 3 passes. So I was like, in a perfect world where we have the capacity, the volunteer capacity, if I knew that was possible, it would be part of the plan. In my mind, we make one pass of the universe, and then we pick out, we're going to have conversations. So we're going to know that they lean our way, they're strongly our way. And so then once we've completed that pass, hopefully, because we have our primary, and Gennady, correct me, it's not on my radar yet, I think June 8th. So we're starting to vote basically in May. And so I'm like, by May, I would like to have, hit those 3,800 doors. You get a 30% contact rate. So then you're going to have roughly 1,100, maybe more people that you've spoken to, presumably, if you're doing it right. Most of them will be in, you will be the treatment universe that they've heard flattering things about you. And so they should be more inclined to support you. So the people that are more inclined to support you, then the universe for the final month of the campaign, once we go into GOTV, get out the vote, then you want to go back to the people that you've already talked to and say, "Hey, Gennady, I know you supported me before. I want to make sure," and the kind of plan here, or the concept here that the science is saying is plan to vote. Have you made a plan to vote? And when I was taught this concept, it's that you want to walk people through, be present in their future trip to the polls. Hey, are you planning on voting by mail or in person? Oh, I always go in person. Oh, do you know the location? Oh, yeah, it's at the library. Okay, let me check that for you. How's the weather when were you planning on going? On Wednesday? How's the weather on Wednesday? Do you have a ride there? And you want to really spell out the plan. So there's some bit of acceptance that you are going to annoy people. There is also, and people are very sensitive to this, where they're like, because there is a human interaction, they may have a bad interaction. However, there's all these interactions that we don't see about the people that, like, by going too passive, that vote a wrong way, that you talk to in a pub or at a run, in 2 weeks, and they go, "If only I had the information that you told me in this place, I would have made a different choice 3 weeks ago in the election." And that is annoying as well to a person. So there's the annoying by, there is the intent, like there is the annoying by hitting them too many times, but there is also doing them a disservice by not communicating. And it always is going to make me more nervous when I have those people that I'm not communicating with, and therefore doing things that they don't want to do, versus someone just being rude. To be honest, there's when I was trained in this, you're like, look, people always have a bad day. They could have not had any communication from any political party candidate, and they could still treat you like garbage. Now there is a concept that I've developed over the years called channel clutter. And eventually, when you get to late October, every channel, whether you're talking digital, text messaging, door knocking, every channel is going to be cluttered, and there's just some acceptance that goes into that. When you're talking November 6th is the election, and you're talking it's October 30th, there is going to be no clear channel. It is the way that American politics is. Everyone's going to be getting 7 text messages a day. Everyone is, every candidate's going to be putting an op-ed out. The mailbox is going to be, full of people's mail. There's going to be nothing but political ads on TV. Everywhere you go, there's going to be clutter. In particular, it's not every jurisdiction, but in Nevada, where we're a swing state, in Washoe County, where we're a swing county, the national groups will come in and spend millions of dollars on door knocking campaigns. So normally the last channel to clutter is going to be the doors. But when you're talking late October of a general election where there's a competitive Senate race, president race, or governor's race in a swing state like Nevada, there's going to be people that are like, look, you people, there's a note on the door that will say, you come every day, don't come, and what, don't come again, and they're not talking about you, but the average voter doesn't know that it's the culinary union that was there yesterday or the Transhumanist Party that was there on Wednesday. And they think that we, even if you're of opposite political persuasions, they think you guys are all the same organization, even time they're adversarial organizations. So one, I would say, use your best judgment when it comes to this channel clutter, which channel to avoid, or else, put it in your campaign plan that after September, we do nothing. And of course, that's silly, that's hyperbole. But you want to accept the fact that you will be annoying people in October, and then find the channel that makes the most sense based upon the data, who you're trying to talk to, what you need to achieve your political objectives. And that just doesn't apply to the electoral process as well. We had a special session and recently here in Carson City for the state legislature, and lobbyists use these same systems on legislators, and even legislators use it on legislators. I know of an instance when we had a film tax credit bill that was basically a subsidy for the film industry to come to Las Vegas, and it was heavily lobbied on both sides, probably more so on the pro film tax credit side. But there was legislators who were, all in the mushy middle that were all trying to move people one way or the other. And I know of an instance where a legislator got a message that was like, hey, enough's enough. Like, I'm going to make my decision. So it's not even when the Transhumanist Party is talking to undecided voters. It applies everywhere where, you have this balance of how much is too much information. And then I always tell candidates, every year, people will say, I'm not voting for you now because you knocked on my door. The data, the political scientists have done that data work. That is such a, it's an argument that doesn't have a lot of punch. There's not a lot of data that says because of this door knock that pushed them over the edge, this bad interaction, that they have went from voting from Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump. Like, that's not how voting, the decision tree is made. There's another way to lose a vote. They could be a vote for you and just say, like, look, because that guy knocked my door, I'm not turning in my ballot. But that still doesn't really pencil out in the data. That the political scientists are not finding that that stepping over that line of annoyance does not have a deleterious effect, and certainly not as much of a deleterious effect of not communicating with somebody that could use that information. So that is really where there is good hard science that if you don't communicate with these people, that is where you're going to be losing votes, not if you overly communicate them. Now, there is some data that's coming back even from that person being annoyed. And the question that begs is, like, is this the right person that I should be communicating with? Is there another opportunity where if Gennady was walking a door that he could get a vote for a transhumanist? So you want to also, not be scared of a bad interaction, but use that as feedback to, like, making sure that you're applying your limited time in the proper, and not only in the proper, but the best place that you could. Because that could be absolutely a nothing burger, that bad information that you're getting back from a voter, but it could also be a very good signal that you're at the wrong door in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong place. So you want to pay attention to those signals coming back from the electorate.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer. And we do have a related question. This is an interesting one from Nicholas Perez. Adam, what do you think about analyzing social media data to identify people with tastes and preferences similar to the party and sending them personalized messages through social media? This goes to your point of trying to figure out which people, which demographics would be more receptive to a particular message, but also, of course, this resembles Cambridge Analytica a bit too much for my tastes. At least the initial modus operandi of Cambridge Analytica was to create very detailed social media profiles of people and send them targeted advertising. But on the other hand, when you run your campaigns, you have some idea of what the particular demographics are, how people are likely to approach certain issues, and there is some issue-specific outreach that you do as a result. So again, where do you strike that balance in personalizing outreach, finding likely supporters, but not being too invasive of people's privacy?
Okay, so I actually really like this tactic. Everything's a caveat. Time, place, and circumstance, right? So is it a good enough tactic? The answer is probably yes, but is it the best tactic at the time? I don't know. Like I said, that's going to be individualized, time, place, and circumstance. Now, I will tell you, the year prior to an election typically is going to be a lot about fundraising. The average American thinks about politics, at least prior to the Trump administration, for 7 minutes a week, and that's not city council, that's not Congress, that's not the feds, that's everything. I suspect Trump has probably doubled that by his effort for everyone to pay attention to him all the time. So let's say that doubles to 14 minutes a week. There's still many minutes that people are not thinking about politics. But so it's a lot about fundraising this time of year. So I'm doing a fundraising tactics class with the Democratic Party on Wednesday. So this will be a nice little refresher for me. So there's a million different ways that you can figure out, okay, who's going to give me money? It could be who ran for the seat before, who's donated to like-minded people, who is a value partner, who has donated to somebody that is similar to what I'm pursuing, my values, what I'm trying to do as a ballot initiative or a political party. So, but there's one tactic that I did. I had a candidate, and they had a bunch of people positively interacting with a social media post, and he had, I don't know, maybe 100 or 200 likes or loves or whatever. And so very quickly, I didn't want to sink a bunch of time into it because it's that's a limited resource that is much more valuable than money, is staff time, and then primarily candidate time. But we were starting to saturate, the donor pool. And so we wanted, the most obvious places of who I should call first, who I should call second, who I should call 30th and 40th. We're now off the books. So we're looking at who's the next best call for us to make. So I took their social media, and then I crossed anyone that interacted with the social media, starting with the deepest interaction. Let's say they commented, and then going, to the more shallow interactions where it was a love and then a like and then whatever. And then I very quickly put them into the donor database for Nevada. And then, was it a game changer? Did we raise $50,000 off of that tactic? No, but I think we raised about $500. So we were able to, out of those 200 people, probably 190 of them, no giving history. Now, the number one reason why people don't engage in a action is because no one asked them to. So, but as far as, so we could have went through and just, hit everybody up and said, hey, would you be interested in donating to my campaign? I know you've been paying attention to me, but it's not about what could happen. It's about maximizing that effort. And so I wanted to really narrow that down to who were the people that were most likely to write us a check. And like I said, we were able to go from, let's say, 150 prospects down to, I think 10 people had given money to a political candidate in the past. And then I think we ended up getting 6 donations, roughly maybe $100 from each of them. So it wasn't the core component of our fundraising strategy, but it was definitely, it contributed. We ended up that effort actually was a superlative for the campaign. It's about to break. I think he actually broke a fundraising record for the district that he's running for. Now that accounted for about 1% of our fundraising haul, but we still did it. We did once we kind of got stuck where we hit all of the people that were the 15th, first, second, and third best calls. Then we were able to get to social media, and I can tell you, not only is that tactic smart, it works. So I would definitely do that. The problem is that the economics might not necessarily be there. How much effort do you need to put in for what you get out? But I think it's worthy. I think that even if there is not a ton of bang for your buck, I think that you got to learn along the way and treat it as, okay, I'm going to be learning, what tactics work and when to apply, when not to apply them. But I think that is I think a prudent spot to start to engage in that tactic and learn when it works, when it doesn't, how to maximize it. I've only done it a couple times, but it was December actually that I was able to do it, applying it to fundraising. So I definitely think that a pretty good tactic to explore.
Yes, thank you. And your response speaks to the importance of experimentation and iteration and deriving lessons from actual attempts at a particular tactic. Now, we have in our YouTube chat Jennifer Hughes, who ran for mayor of Camden, New Jersey in 2021. She was endorsed by the Transhumanist Party, and she says door knocking can be very effective. She was the first candidate in Camden in about 50 years who didn't come from the Democratic Party. And she said when she door knocked during her campaign, the residents of her city were very enthusiastic that a candidate would come to the door in person. And I think in her situation, it was because the Democrats had kind of taken victory for granted. And of course, they did win in that particular election, but very few times did the residents of Camden actually come across a candidate who wanted to speak with them and hear their issues of interest and concern. So this tactic did work for her, and that's a good data point as well. Now, I also wanted to bring Daniel Tweed into this conversation because he ran for city council 4 times in Thousand Oaks, California, and he is also of the opinion that standing for office is standing for civilization and that politics is the human connection business. So that is how he ran his campaigns. He also notes he got appointed to the Thousand Oaks Council on Aging, probably as a result of multiple runs for city council. So he gained some visibility among the decision makers, and when there was a vacancy in the Council on Aging, it was a temporary vacancy. I think it expired in the middle of 2025, but he was there on the Council of Aging for a few months as a result of the visibility that his campaigns had gotten. And Daniel, if you're able to join us right now, let us know what your experience has been in terms of door knocking or any tactics that did or did not work in that regard, or social media tactics. Let's see if Daniel, yes, did or did not work in that regard, or social media tactics. Let's see if Daniel, yes, did or did not work in that regard, or social media tactics. It looks like there's an echo here. Daniel.
Yeah, it's interesting because I first announced my run at a amateur radio club in Conejo Valley, CVARC, and I recently bought a piece of equipment from someone who voted for me from that 2018 announcement. So it's like, I think as a community science officer for the Transhumanist Party, I think we should look at using things like amateur radio, which I think is a very friendly community science platform. But yeah, it's I'm very empowered to get ready for the next time that District 5 comes up for election, which will be in 2028. And that's a very good district encompassing not only City Hall, but most of the downtown businesses on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. So I'm looking forward to that. And I wonder, does your election encompass at large or a district kind of election? So let me leave you there with that question.
Adam, I think you need to unmute.
I'm a bit confused by the question. So I've worked districted races and I've worked at large districts. I would say that I take the same. I can take the same approach to both. It always wants to be. You always want to be data driven. It's gonna. There's an XY axis that I kind of scout out about. Basically on the x-axis, let's say intimacy, which is going to be like how closely can I connect with a voter, and then scale. What scale do I need to intimately connect with a voter on the doors? If you're talking about a presidential race, you're talking about walking almost 1 billion doors. By the time you figure that 1 in 3 don't pick up, so you have to do 3 passes of the entire American electorate. That is a big lift. If you're talking about a city council race, you can where you're trying to knock 4,000 doors, that is doable. I would say we should be trying to hit full saturation because the scale needed is low, and so you're able to allocate that resource to provide that intimacy. Going down the line, you have the candidate knocking the door. You have a friend of the candidate or family of the candidate knocking the door, like a dedicated volunteer. Then you're probably going to the candidate making phone calls. Then you're going to mail, TV, and then until your text messages, and robocalls are kind of the bottom of that intimacy calculation. Digital maybe where there's not a ton of interaction there. But I don't want to go too far off on a tangent. I want to make sure that I'm answering your question that I was initially confused by. So it was about districted races versus at-large races. And if you could provide some clarity, I think it was Dan that asked that question, right?
Yes. So Daniel, I think you were asking what kinds of candidates Adam represents, whether they're candidates in a particular district or at large candidates. And Adam has said he has represented both. So does that help in answering the question? Let's see. I think Daniel will acknowledge that in the chat perhaps, but I think I also am curious about one aspect of the clients you represent, because your approach is a bit unique. You don't confine yourself to a particular, let's say, political party or a particular ideology. Even now, you said you represent candidates, some of whom are Democrats, one of whom is a Republican, one of whom is a nonpartisan candidate, and you've had a history of doing that. So you're not running a strictly partisan outlet, but I am wondering, what criteria do you use to select and retain your clients? Because you're not just going to take any candidate as a client. You have certain values, you have certain, let's say, character traits that you look for in a candidate whom you would represent. So what would some of those be?
That's actually a fantastic question. I mean, there was a bit of consternation I had, especially with I consider myself kind of a classical conservative, kind of I think that in this, there's I think the Transhumanist Party is a fairly intellectual party, kind of like a European Enlightenment neoliberal, which would be kind of a classical conservative. But the Republican Party that I was a member of does not exist anymore. And I think that there's lots of neo-nationalist, kind of proto-fascist kind of strains that are in the Republican Party right now. So working with the Republican in this ecosystem was definitely something that I did not take lightly. And so the short answer is there is a je ne sais quoi, I think, just there's something that like you can't really put your fingers on, but there's just a human connection there. And so I think that's the most important one. It's just, how does it feel? You know, like when you're sitting, can you work with the person? Is the person respectful? Are they, we get involved like where people must agree 100% of the time, or they are our enemies. And I think that there is an art of disagreement that is lost. And I think, like, I would say among that are secondary to that je ne sais quoi is there a level of maturity? Is this person disciplined? Like, are they coachable? Are they hardworking? I think those are kind of going to be the things. So, like, why participate if someone is going to be sloppy, undisciplined, not really work hard? It doesn't matter if this person, shares my brain. It's not really going to amount to much. They're just not going to be effective on the campaign trail, and they're not going to be effective governing. And I think that, like I said, I don't want to really become too distant from kind of core values of what I seek from government. But what I've learned from policy is that every policy is so unique. I mean, there is a perfectly placed tax cut out there, and there is a perfectly constructed social program that are all absolutely perfect in one jurisdiction at one time and absolutely inappropriate in another jurisdiction at another time, And I think so, it's hard to be like, well, how do you feel about X? How do you feel about Y? I like to think about it as like, political information. When I was in political science school, we talked about heuristic voting versus this myth of fully informed voting. And I'll say myth because they put out, we as 20-year-old political science students, we're like, the ideal is fully informed, and in reality, it's a unicorn. There is no such thing as a fully informed voter, because by interacting with the Transhumanist Party right now, I'm missing Fox News, I'm missing MSNBC. That is political information that is rapidly evolving at the same time. So we can't be, at the same place at the same time. So there always is, heuristics, right? So anyway, also, like I said, among the maturity, hardworking, discipline, there needs to be some general direction of how we approach politics. Like, does this person, share some critical components of how I view the world, how I view my community, how I view society? And that's not really hard and fast for one individual or the other. There's unique circumstances that these are applied differently to every person, to every candidate. So I hope that answers the question. I think a general alignment of values. There has to be some untangible je ne sais quoi. There has to be good feelings, that there's just this vibe, I think the kids may say. And then I think some character traits that transcend kind of policy preferences about basic human respect that can exist anywhere in the political spectrum, and some hard work and discipline and focus that can exist anywhere in the political spectrum. So, and those variables are going to be applied unfairly to every kind of instance of which I decide when I'm working for a candidate or not.
Very interesting. Thank you. And Alan Crowley writes in our chat, the criteria are the analytical level. The target client is a narrative, and he wants to hear both sides of that. So based on my understanding of his comment, so there are some abstract criteria that you may have in mind, but they interact with who the person is. And are you able to make an effective narrative to the voters out of that candidate, essentially, out of the whole package of who that person is, not just specific ideas that person might hold? Would you agree with that? Would you?
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? Like, if you can't tell a story, then you're not going to win an election. There needs to be, there needs to be one. You need the strategy and the resources. I like to tell candidates now that really want to focus this year prior about you know, about weaving that story, right? And I'm like, it doesn't matter if you're you know, reading the best story on earth, if you're telling the best story on earth, if no one's hearing it, you know, it's all for naught. So you need that amplifier of the you know, the fundraising is really that engine that does that. And then the narrative you're talking about is, you know, is the steering system of the car, right? So you need both to move anywhere. It's particularly like, and once again, I think that, you know, the more the further I go on, you know, it's always time, place, and circumstance, and I can't stress that enough. You know, it is, but that's the key thing, and particularly hard in this regard is judicial races. I remember when someone first came to me and said that they wanted, you know, to attack this this judicial race. They wanted to run for judge. I was like, you know, what do you run on? You know, I got better grades in school, you know, like, especially if they don't have a record as a judge, you know, you're not running off of, you know, some people use the, you know, bar satisfaction rate with an incumbent judge. Oh, you are good, you are bad. I think that's kind of a flawed variable because, you know, it's taken by, you know, 100 opinionated lawyers, you know, so it's not necessarily, you know, there's some response bias with that. But, you know, when my candidate came to me and said they want to run for judge, I'm like, what's the separation point? You know, what's the narrative? What's the story, you know, that I'm trying to tell here? And there's not a lot that you can do when it comes to judge. But you can, and a lot of it is really unfair. You know, some of it is just taking advantage of where we're at in the political ecosystem. One judge I had, and it's not the same one that I was describing, it was I successfully unseated an incumbent judge. They have like a 99% reelection rating. And we were going into, I believe it was 16, maybe 20. When did Ruth Bader Ginsburg die? It would have been
2021, I believe.
It was an election year, so it must have been 20. Hold on, she's up for reelection this year in 26, so it would have been 20. It would have been 2020. So she died in October of 2020. So it was a woman running against a man. The incumbent was a man. And then the debate going into Nevada early voting was, what kind of woman are we going to have elected to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg? A woman like Ruth Bader Ginsburg or a woman not like Ruth Bader Ginsburg? And at that point, I knew that election that we had a good shot of winning it, because what was in the ecosystem, the whole debate around anything judicial was what kind of woman do we want to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg? So was that fair? Did that mean that Kathleen was more qualified than Elliot? No, but strategically, you know, tapping into that vibe that everyone was talking about that month, which is rare, because when you're trying to find a narrative for a political candidate that will propel you to the you know, to the courtroom, you know, sometimes, you know, you get it and you have this narrative that just makes sense, and other times it's just gifted to you by complete happenstance, and it's incumbent of you to take advantage of it. So, you know, was that fair? Did it feel good that I'm just going to, like, you know, hitch our ride to this, you know, national news story? No, it didn't. And it, you know, it wasn't like, oh man, people are going to vote for my candidate because she's great. They were going to vote because everyone was talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Amy Coney Barrett. That was it. So I would say it's political malpractice for me not to hitch my, you know, to rope up that narrative and ride that. So you always want to be trying to craft effective narratives, but sometimes you just got to take the gifts that the calendar gives you, and you know, deal with being an effective judge or effective legislator after the fact. But right now, this is your Ferrari that you're going to take to the finish line. So, and in particular, that's tough on judge races, but it's always tough. Now, I had a buddy last night ask me, like, would I ever run? And I'm a registered Democrat, and you know, I said, look, for a middle-class, middle-aged white guy, a Democratic primary is not always the most favorable place. Now there's alternatives to do that, but the parties in large part have been consumed with this identity sort of politics about driven by identities and social constructs and that sort of thing. There may be opportunities for me to engage other places, but that narrative of is not going to be very compelling in the Democratic Party electorate of right now. Now, in 30 years, that could be quite different. But so that's something that I would struggle, being a middle-class, middle-aged white guy living in a diverse, urban, heavily progressive neighborhood that I live in downtown Reno. It's going to be much more favorable to female candidates, much more favorable to candidates that come from marginalized backgrounds and that sort of those sorts of groups. Now, that's not 100-0, right? But that's where politics is never about one thing being totally right and one thing not. You're talking about one thing being, a little more compelling on the edges that actually kind of compounds itself out into some pretty dramatic effects in the aggregate. So yeah, narrative, super, super important. One, it's not important if no one hears it. You need the resources. I think people spend a lot of time crafting perfect narratives that no one's ever going to hear. That's not good. Have a B- narrative that you have $100,000 that you can tell people about. So it's that allocation of scarce resources, candidate time. So politics is kind of the business of good enough, because you need to have the compelling narrative, have the resources to do it, have analyzed the data to apply it properly, and so so by trying to max out your effectiveness in one bucket at the expense of other buckets, oftentimes I think is an ineffective strategy. So you want all of your buckets to be good enough. So narrative is very, very important, but it's all this dance of also resources. So and where are you spending your time? When it comes to narrative, if you have the resources to do it, polling is very helpful. And I think that there has to, be an acceptance that you want a general kind of narrative for the campaign, but within the electorate, you could have narratives that you can push to subgroups that I think are very, very, very important. I was running a Washoe County Commission race, and they control animal. They control the animal control. They control the pound, basically, the dog catchers, and the people that if there's a mountain lion in your neighborhood, you're calling them. If your dog is running around, they get picked up by the dog catcher. And the district was partially rural, partially suburban, and my candidate was a dog lover. He had 2 pugs or something, some sort of ornamental sort of dog. Definitely a suburban take on what it means for animal ownership. Now, our opponent had a rural kind of take on what animal ownership means. If we remember Christy Nome with her dog story, the dog, which really angered me because I have a pointer, and because this dog was an ineffective hunter, she took him out back to the pond, shot the dog, and bragged about it in her book, which is probably part of the credentials of why she's now the Homeland Security Secretary, because she was braggadocious about her cruelty. Anyway, so I was able to talk to a data warehouse and grab a list of pet owners. And because the county commission handled the animal control board, that was a function of county government. It was squarely in bounds of this was something that was going to be affected. The attitude towards animal ownership and how they interact with pets was going to be part of the job. And so we were able to go to a data warehouse, find likely pet owners, and then craft a mail piece that would basically told the story. Now, most of the voters, I should say, existed in this suburban pocket. So it was, it wasn't like this was a vastly rural district that was going to be empathetic with, shooting a dog that doesn't properly point at birds. It wasn't exactly the Kristi Noem story, but my opposition, but it was close enough where I think people know much more about the Kristi Noem story as opposed to the Jeannie Herman, Washoe County Commissioner story. But anyway, it ended up tragically, my candidate did not want to. He ended up pulling the mailer, but we had the target list. We controlled it for who was likely to turn out, so we knew these were likely to vote pet owners, and we had a great message. They had a very dichotomous view on what it means, how humans interact with animals, and then at the end of the day, my candidate got cold feet and pulled it. But that, I think, was a perfect example. Now, did we run on I love dogs or my candidate loves dogs? Absolutely not. But I think it was a super effective sub-narrative in that district in particular, in that pocket of the electorate. I don't think that message was going to split open the election for us, but I think in that pocket of pet owners, I think it was a very effective way that we could have peeled off votes. Now, he ended up losing that election. I suspect he would have fared way better had we got that message, because the American electorate thinks about politics 7 minutes a week. Gennady knows me personally. Dog owners, especially, kind of younger millennial types, Gen Z, urban dog owners are kind of culty about their pets. And so if you think that somebody was going to, hurt your little puppy, I think that is a political motivator for a lot of people that aren't, burning down the doors, kicking down the doors to go vote in a county commission race. So sub-narrative that existed, encapsulated within this campaign as well. Dogs, legitimate political issue for some people. So
yes, indeed. That is quite a story, and our viewer Hungry and Working derives the lesson from this to know your audience and tailor your message accordingly. So thank you for that comment. Jennifer Hughes writes, yes, a candidate needs resources. Your campaign could be the best ever, but it's no good if everyone doesn't hear the message, and that may be the challenge for a minor political party because resources are so limited. Mike Lazine writes he hates it when career politicians say that everyone should run for office as if it's that easy. No, it is not, because you do need resources and allies. Now, it's interesting, too, to consider, given the scarcity of time and resources, how would you recommend managing that with a small team of volunteers or part-time contributors, especially since we in the USTP are not raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, but we do have some people who are dedicated, who may have a bit of time here and there on occasion. Like you mentioned, the power of having a lobbyist who is just regularly present at, say, a legislature or at a city council meeting, or who may be in a position to write letters on particular issues and make the party's presence known, be a recognized aspect of that venue, a recognized participant. So how would you suggest going about, especially for an organization where really the volunteer effort is predominant, much more so than anything that can be bought or any funds that can be raised?
Okay. One, I would say don't accept where you're at right now is not where you have to be at, right? So I would say attempt to grow. And is this going to be wildly successful? No, it is going to suck and you're going to be terrible at it. But I think if you are, there is, it's kind of a directional and not a single data point. If you are headed towards growth, because there's this illusion of stasis, where we think that like, oh, I could stay where I'm at. And in reality, if that's the case, and you are stating that you are maintaining, I can tell you where you're actually at. You're shrinking. So if you don't know you're growing, you can lie to yourself and say that you're static. You're not. You're shrinking. So I would say have the courage to fail as you are growing, and then accept that being better tomorrow than you are today, even if it is marginal, is a win, because we're talking about the direction and we're talking about compounding wins. And then some of this growth is going to be very nominal, and some of it will be very rapid. Now, if you don't participate at all, you'll miss out on the nominal and the rapid gains. But the bang for your return on investment will be low as you are gaining the skills you need to grow. So I would say, one, have the courage to fail as you are committed to growth, regardless of how big that growth is, as long as you are growing bigger. Gennady, we met through running in December. I don't know what it was, maybe 5 years ago, but it kind of reminds me, because I'm not a big New Year's Eve resolution guy, but I could not run a mile. I signed up for a half marathon. It was early December, and I was going to start my athletic year in advance of the New Year's. So I couldn't run a mile. I could bike a lot. Half marathon was signed up for in the end of January, and I was able to get up to a mile after a couple days, and I celebrated that, and it was so cool. And I remember I would basically, when I had ran half mile back, back to my office, and it was a super proud moment for me. Well, I ended up running a pretty decent half marathon time. I was able to hit that 13-mile mark about 8 or 9 weeks later. Then in June, I ran my fastest 50K, was my first 50K. And we're talking 7 months prior to that, I was jumping up for joy at running my mile. It was like I was probably almost had as much enthusiasm for completing my mile as I did for completing this very rough mountain 50K in Lake Tahoe around the mountains. So I think I tell that story because the incremental benefits that led to these pretty dramatic results, it was the direction and the consistency. So there were these nominal benefits running, going from 1 mile to 1.5 miles, then going, and then just this, it is the compound effect of these nominal gains and that direction that led me to run the 50K, to eventually run a 50 miler around Catalina, to run a 100-mile down in Las Vegas, but it was all just the directional issue and consistently getting slightly better. So now on the other side, I do share your concern about being underfunded. It is the candidate that I have that's breaking fundraising records is a very, very very odd place for me, because I'm the guy who has that gets outspent. I would say, and now good luck or good news for you guys. My win ratio when the candidate has more money than my candidate has, I think is better than when my candidate has more money. And what I think that is people use this. The lesson here is, if you don't have much money, you better spend it smartly. You better spend this prudently. So I think that when you have a lot of money, you really throw the discipline, the economics of how do you spend that, because you look like, I have more than the other guy. I have more than the other gal. I don't need to be smart because I have more, and I will just throw money at the problem. The problem is there are so many perils out there as to how to waste money, that even if you are outspending someone 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 10 to 1, you can waste that advantage with 1 or 2 bad purchases. And now all of a sudden, instead of raising 100,000, you're spending that money as somebody that is prudently spending $10,000. And this is a tale as old as time. I watch it happen with my own candidates. I watch it happen on the other side. My candidate that went to Carson City, she was outspent 4 to 1. There was another candidate that is on the board of regents. I think he was outspent 9 to 1. the kind of earliest signal that you're going to see is a districted race in which this candidate that has buckets of money is now on television in the primary. Well, if they spend $100,000 on television in the primary, I like to think about these channels I was talking about, whether it's TV, radio, whatever, as buckets of varying sizes with holes of varying sizes. So the biggest hole is going to be people that are just never going to vote when you're talking the primary, because it's, you're talking 20, 25% turnout. That means that if you're talking to everybody, your first kind of hole in your bucket is going to be 75% of that bucket is going to, is regardless of how big the bucket is going to have 75% of that water is going to come rushing out. Now, TV is a massive, massive bucket, but you're not going to be able to carry much water if 75% of it is leaking out. Now, if you're in a districted race, now it's what percentage of the viewing area, if you're on television, covers the districted race. So in this case, the one in my head, the viewing area was divided into 4 districts. So now there is, let's say, this $100,000 TV buy. 25% of it is, or only 25% of it is effectively hitting people that are going to show up. And then now a further, that's being divided by 25% more when you figure that there's people that are not in the viewing area that are going to be seeing that. So even if they do show up to vote and they love you, they can't vote for you. So now we're talking $8,000 out of that 100,000 is actually hitting likely primary voters in your district. So even if you had $10,000 and you were spending that money prudently, and this guy had 100, your dollars on target is going to be better when you have $10,000. So I said that's the earliest signal of a well-funded candidate that is about to lose, is they're in a districted primary and they're on television, right? Now, that's the most dramatic, but there is a million different ways that you can waste money on a campaign. Don't do it. So if you are, like I said, the message here, if you are an underfunded political operation, you better be smart about how you spend your money. And that can do a lot of the heavy lifting for not having the resources that you need. Also, have the courage to stumble into getting more resources. I told my candidate that's breaking records, he has heard yes from almost everybody, and he's very happy about this. And I go, I'm actually not that happy about it. And he's like, what are you talking about? Everyone I call says yes. And I'm like, that's problematic because, let's say we raised $50,000. Well, what if we could have raised 500,000 if we had the courage to hear no? So we're limiting ourselves in our own box by, celebrating these yeses. When, I don't want to hear no I don't want to hear no constantly. That's a bigger problem. But I want no to kind of define my borders as to what my potential is. I don't want my cowardice of me not having the courage to ask to define my limits. I want those no's to really shape that structure as to what's possible for my political effort. So it was great that he always heard yes, but also concerning that we don't know what our potential is because we haven't really heard no, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And thank you. So it does seem like you would recommend that we step up our fundraising efforts, but also utilize any money raised very judiciously so that we could make it go a lot further than a much better funded candidate or organization who might just be throwing money around. Now, along these lines, Alan Crowley is helping us out with a $5 super chat. So that's a start to our fundraising. And he has a question for you, Adam. What would you recommend for developing a fundraising program? Because honestly, right now, our fundraising program is the YouTube super chats, plus we accept a few PayPal donations from time to time.
Okay, so one, I think that what I would do is lay out like a plan, right? If I'm going to the gas station, I have my car. And I'm thinking, okay, I want to put enough gas in this car to get to where I want to go. I got to find out if I'm going from my house in Central Reno to South Reno, or if I'm going to San Francisco, 180 miles down the road. So I think developing that map and saying, what are we fundraising for? Because it's not going to be very effective if you're like, so we could do political stuff. Like political stuff. Okay, great. I want to invest. Sorry, kids, you're going to public school now because we're doing political stuff, right? Now, if you were like, hey, look, if you write $100,000 check, this is where we're going. And there is a what in my training, what we call plan to win. So you have your value partner. So you have you establish that you're value partners, but sometimes without that plan to win, all that solidarity in that value partner connection, you could have a really deep connection. But what fool is going to even though you love them, what fool is going to throw money at a problem when you don't know what's the plan to win to push this forward, right? So I think developing an end point as to where you want to be, and then the map on how to get there, and then work your way back and say, okay, how much money do I need to get to this end point? And so I think a lot of people work about it like, okay, first I reach out, raise money, and then we find out kind of how much money we have, and then we go to an end point. I would say reverse engineer that and say, where do we want to be? And then work your way back, because then you have a solid plan to win. Now all you need to do is and it sounds like, you're good at connecting with value partners. Now you just need to find the person that who loves this destination, and who has the propensity and the desire to give money. And then let's work our way back. And you'd be surprised at how much more people are willing to sacrifice of their own time and treasure if there is that critical component of plan to win. Because at that point, it is very strategic, and you are not saying invest in my passion project. You are saying let's organize our shared political values to go to a desirable shared place with our shared sacrifice, and that is a much more strategic kind of venture. Instead of just raising money for an abstract political concept, is to really reverse engineer the plan, I would say. From there, let's say we have this plan, then you want to go with, like I said, you want to work your way back from. It's a solidarity viability kind of threshold here, right? So who are the most enthusiastic about the plan? Who are the most viable options to fund said plan? And where those XY axis kind of cross, start there. Okay, that person's off the books. That's either a successful effort or an unsuccessful effort. Where does that next XY axis meet? Who is the next best person? Okay, and then here's the other thing that candidates often miss, or political organizations often miss. There is a concept I call weaving social fabric. So let's say you have made 6 phone calls. 5 of them are absolute garbage. Even though they share your values, even though they are wealthy, you just screwed something up, right? Now you get to number 6. You call them. It's a fabulous conversation. They're committed to donating $1,000. That's a big win. Let's call that a B- right now, right? So the people that are going to donate $1,000 to the Transhumanist Party are probably in a social network in which there contains more people that are willing to give $1,000 to the Transhumanist Party. So the critical component to go from your B- to getting $1,000 check, you could stop there, celebrate your B-. Okay, you're not going to make the honor roll, right? The A is now going, Mr. Stoyaroff, who else in your network shares our same values and would be really fired up about the place that we want to take the Transhumanist Party? Okay, cool. What are their phone numbers? Would you prefer to call them in advance and talk to them first, or would it be okay if I chat with them? Can I tell them that Gennady told me to call? And you are weaving social fabric. You have one disparate, piece of string. You are going to attach that to a different, quilt. And then you are going to kind of, until you have this beautiful tapestry that you're taking all these different strings. But you want, if you have one option on who to donate, or who you would call to ask to donate to, you should, if you are doing this properly, you should have an unlimited amount, because one should get 2 or 3 more. By the time you call those 2 or 3 more, they should now, you should now have 9. If everybody is giving you 3 people. Now, if you are toasting champagne after your $1,000 check, well, there you go. Then you better make that stretch. But as opposed to now hopping on the phone and finding your next $1,000 check, when that's successful, calling the 2 other people that person called you. So there is a community organizing aspect and a networking aspect of this, and a weaving social fabric concept to this that I think is very, very important. If you guys have heard the Chinese proverb of the bamboo, in which you must water the dirt because it is setting its roots, and if you miss watering this dirt, the whole bamboo will die. But for 5 years, you water that dirt like a crazy person and nothing happens. And the next day you show up after nothing happening and you water that dirt. And then eventually 5 years later, the bamboo grows faster than, I believe, any other plant on earth. But if you skip watering that dirt, then that growth never occurs. And I think when you are talking about the earliest days of serious political efforts, I tell that parable of watering the bamboo dirt over and over again because it sucks. People do not pick up the phone. They are oftentimes not happy. They're uncomfortable conversations. And then after you go out there and water dirt on the next phone call and water dirt on the next phone call, and you've gone months without doing anything, then all of a sudden you get 3 $1,000 checks in the mail. And you are like, oh my God, I've had such a terrible week of fundraising. Where did this happen? And then you call Adam, and he's your campaign manager, and he goes, well, guess what? Your bamboo finally sprouted. After months of looking like a crazy person, like you are just, making mud out there, you are setting the roots of that fundraising bamboo tree, and they finally sprouted. And it often happens, not always, often happens when you are worn out, burnt out, give up. And it just seems like, I've had a candidate who was like, worked very diligently for months. There was some sort of family issue. She took the week off, was very, had a lot of guilt and shame about taking that week off, but ended up getting, several checks from efforts that she put in months earlier. And she was like, oh my God, it's great. I did nothing this week. And I had one of my best fundraising weeks. And I was like, that is because, you've watered dirt, putting in the work the months prior that led to this point. So I hope that answered the question about fundraising. It's about being strategic and patient and creative and courageous and just networking like hell.
Yes, thank you. That was a great answer. And Alan Crowley writes, that sounds like an entrepreneurial funding plan for getting first investors. And it seems that this year we're going to need to do a lot of watering of bamboo dirt. Now, I wanted to bring up this article that you wrote in 2021, A Tactical Guide to Healing Our Political Divisions. Here is the link to those who have not read it yet. It's a brief article. I would highly recommend it. And our viewers have taken an interest in the subject of healing divisions. Mike Lazine points out, healing divisions will take a lot of work as long as so many Americans feel comfortable with being in tribes in both social media and in the real world. And that is a huge problem. It's a problem to the extent that it's difficult to be a centrist or to try to appeal to the center or to broad constituencies because so many Americans are tribalized, and because so many Americans like division and tribalism at present, they don't step out of their comfort zones or interact with people they disagree with. There are so many times when I found even myself being pigeonholed into one of the political tribes or the other, usually by the other political tribe, by people who said, well, if you don't agree with every single component of our partisan package, you must be on the other tribe. You must be a Trumpist, or you must be a left liberal, or you must be a fascist, or you must be a communist. And it seems since 2021, when you wrote that article, this has gotten worse because the tribalism hasn't gone anywhere. The underlying factors that lead it to persist have only intensified. So how do you think that can be countered, and would you update the views in that article for the political landscape of today to provide guidance for people who seek to transcend the tribal divisions?
So I wrote that in a pre-AI world. So every word of that is my own thought. So I remember a lot of what I put in there. So I don't think I would change much. If I remember, it was talking about thick skin and maturity. What's funny, going down to the legislature, I think it was easier to. It is easier to have relationships of disagreements with the other political party down in Carson City than your own, because there is just an acceptance that this is on the surface, that we do not agree, and people can move to the position of the ecosystem of a place that there is some sort of agreement, with just accepting that in that political sphere, most of that political sphere is going to be disagreement. And whereas opposed to where most of that sphere is in agreement when you're in your tribe, the spot of disagreement is very uncomfortable. So I think that it's easier sometimes to, once you've stepped across the aisle, to be there, because the disagreement is just baked into the cake, in a way that we get so immersed in our tribes that it's not there when you're in your own tribe. Now I'm going to take people, or I can't remember, one of your viewers, I think, mentioned that people are comfortable in tribes. I'm going to take that to task. I think that that people are. It is the social connection that comes from social media versus the social connection that comes with getting coffee with somebody. There is a faux social connection that comes from that social media interaction versus the in-person interaction. And I'm going to say that same thing exists in the tribal ecosystem, that there is a faux comfort, that you think that you are comforted, but in reality, it is quite the opposite. I think that there is terror that people experience, whether they realize that or not, whether it's kind of deep in their spirit, or on the surface, and they are they are woke to this, and they are aware that this is going on. But I'm going to say that it is, fake calories. It is deriving energy from caffeine versus nutrition, deriving, sleep through rest through medicated sleep, as opposed to just sleep hygiene. And I will say that tribalism gives you this false, fleeting sense of security. And so I do not think that people are truly comfortable in that tribe. In fact, my taking on a Republican this year is really an effort to push back and to just get better at the art of disagreement. We definitely agree on issues less than I'm used to with my Democratic clients, but she gets a velvet glove because we are both engaging in the process of being able to have the benefit of existing together and teaching each other that we can interact, although we disagree, is a better value than pushing my ideology over her ideology, or vice versa. Is that our relationship that we have that transcends political party is offering value that is greater than winning an election for my ideology or not. So I think it's like free speech when people agree with me is I think another another concept. I think that be okay with people disagreeing with you. And I think mission critical to that is being a very good listener and and separating, understanding the position that somebody's coming with versus preaching to them versus changing your own values. So I think communicating, in particular, listening better is a good way to do that. I was shocked. My legislator in Carson City is a phenomenal listener. And there are people that disagree with her, that hate her policy, that wanted stuff changed, and they like her. After she heard what they said, maybe she took one of their 10 points and said, you know what, I hear where you're coming from. I will adapt this. I think that I could live with this, and I think that's good. And she's got a very, very good record from the progressive groups. And there was a conservative group that scored her as the highest rated Democrat in Northern Nevada. And those existed at the same time. And so I think that if people feel heard, that it makes disagreement easier. Where if you are where it is not, you are not doing what I want because you are ignoring me or do not care, and you are not accepting, you are not listening to my position. If you fully listen to someone's position, try to integrate it in what you're trying to do, and then finally end up disagreeing, I have found that those disagreements are much more easy to stomach than ones where you're like, screw you, you're wrong, I'm right. You are the wrong idea, you are the wrong person, you are the wrong tribe. And so therefore you are not going to be included. Those disagreements, I think, are much more vicious than if somebody feels fully heard.
Yes, thank you for that response, Adam. And it is quite helpful to note that on a certain level, tribalism does make people feel uncomfortable, and hopefully your words will motivate some people to get out of their social media echo chambers and engage more with people of different perspectives. Our friend John H., More Life Please, writes, people expect more of their own tribe or near tribe. No one has more problems with vegetarians than vegans. And I do think sometimes inside that echo chamber, minute differences get amplified to the point where people start pointing fingers at one another or excommunicating one another, even though they're actually quite close in many of their fundamental views. Mike Lazine writes, he thinks you are correct. There can be, for instance, lots of MAGA people who actually agree with liberals on certain issues, but are afraid to admit that in order to avoid being black sheeped. Hungry and Working writes, in real life, tribalism is not as bad as the media make it out to be. In their office, they get along with and are popular with people of all demographics. Just treating people with respect gets you far. And Mike Lazine also points out, yes, in his mind, tribalism exists more on social media, and for the real world, it only exists at political rallies more than anywhere else. Though I have seen some vicious social media comments from people I know in real life. And I think the social media incentive structure can sometimes extract the worst tendencies out of people who might otherwise be reasonably well behaved in person. Now, we have an interesting question from Alan Crowley. Do you have any comments on Arnold Kling's book about the 3 languages of politics? This is a book that was released in 2013, and there is a page on the Cato Institute website where a free PDF download is available from this link that I've shared here. It's subtitled Talking Across the Political Divides. Are you familiar with this work?
No, but I would love to read it. I wrote it down, and it's going in my Amazon cart. I'm on a bit of a Nevada political history tear when it comes to reading. I have Bill Raggio, who was the majority minority leader in the Senate for years. I have his 600-page bio. I'm working my way through. Gennady, hold on just a brief moment here.
Yes, I know who that is. So in the meantime, we will go to some of our viewer comments. So Scarlett Zanarkand writes, whether we would benefit from altering everyone's brains to eradicate radical ideologies, such as whichever ideologies lead to irrational paranoia, fear, or tribalism. At this point, I would say it's better to work with the tools we have, the tools of persuasion, or essentially creating incentives to discourage that kind of thinking, just because we don't know enough about how the brain works. The brain is the most complex organ of the body, and it's the least well understood. So I would say we are decades away from being able to directly re-engineer human brains in such a way that wouldn't have adverse side effects. But I think we have social technologies to deal with these kinds of tendencies, and these conversations, the virtual enlightenment salons that we hold, hopefully will reach enough people to make a difference. Now, given that we have about 9 minutes left in our virtual enlightenment salon, I wanted to give Art Ramon the chance to ask a question. So Art Ramon, please go ahead.
You mentioned polling companies, data warehouses. Can you name some other sources of the data and where the analysis is taking place? Because you did mention sort of collecting your own data. Where do you put this data, and where do you analyze it? When I was doing some volunteer work for the Grijalva campaign many years ago, they had like a website where I entered all the addresses of the people we collected signatures from. And it seemed to be a specific Democratic website. But I don't remember much from that time. What do you know of that? How can you explain that more?
Okay, so before my dog went nuts, I gotta read I'm gonna thank you for that referral to the book. I certainly will read it. I just don't know at what point. But I don't have a lot to offer because I'm not really familiar with the book itself, and I apologize to everybody about meaning to take it aside. Okay, so where do you find the data? I think don't pigeonhole data as kind of one thing or the other. It doesn't have to be in a nice clean spreadsheet. It could just be kind of receipts of interactions that you're having in different ways. I look. You got to beg, borrow, and steal, right? So if there's, of course, the data that comes from how many people voted, that's going to be on county registrar sites. On the flip side of that, the comprehensive stuff, I believe if you were working with a Democratic candidate in a very good database, it's probably called the Voter Activation Network, or VAN. So that was probably the in fact, I would say if it was a Democratic effort in the last 20 years, I can almost certainly say that you were in the van. Now, in California, they are starting to develop other options to the data. And to be honest with you, I would say as the Transhumanist Party, being able to have a strong database would probably be the first waypoint on that fundraising plan. If you guys could really get really good data, and I don't know if that's going to be in a certain geography or nationwide, but a database, I think, where you're having an enhanced voter file would be a really good kind of first expense. If you are trying to take the party to the next level, because I have a nonpartisans and Republicans, it used to be, because of the amount of investment needed, that the only two options out there were the van for the Democrats, and I believe it used to be called Voter Vault or Voter Vol for the Republicans. And then the Koch brothers invested enough money where they had a viable third option. But now, as the cost of entry to these enhanced databases is going lower and lower, there's beginning to pop up smaller players that I think provide good opportunities for the Transhumanist Party to go to that next level. Other data, very, very important, probably more important even than the voter level data, is fundraising data. So that is going to be at the FEC website. I believe it's fec.gov. those have, I mean, you're talking billions of data points as to who's given money to what jurisdiction, what cause. If you are going to like master a place to live, master data, and if you had somebody that was, you know, spent 1,000 hours mastering that website, the Transhumanist Party would have a lot more money. So like you could look up, I may start even like looking up, because you could look up occupation employer there. Who is a scientist? Who is a doctor? Who, like, what profession is disproportionately represented in transhumanism ideology, right? Maybe, and then, so let's see, you know, who are in those industries, who are in those companies, who are in those, you know, persuasions, and who is given money. So, okay, this guy's given $100,000. He's a scientist that works at some laboratory that promotes longevity. Okay, this is probably a guy that I want to track down a phone number, write him a letter, send him an email, all of the above, give him a call, right? So the data lives at the FEC website. Also, for state level efforts, local level efforts, those are going to be, that donor data is going to be contained in those. For us, I believe the website is called Aurora in Nevada. That's going to catalog local donations. And in Nevada, we do not have occupation employer, so that you know, that database provides some asset, but also some liability versus, you know, other databases always have pluses and minuses, and that is for fundraising data. But every state has one. Even some localities have one. There is databases of lobbyists. Those are good, you know, places to look. Who represents a company that shares our values? Then you're talking about election results. Those are, you know, those are out there as well. Then you're talking about data that you are generating yourself when you're gathering signatures, like you said, when you're having interactions on the doors, you know, taking in that data and cataloging that, hopefully in a good database where you can, in retrospect, look at it, see what's working, what's not working. There is data that you analyze when you're talking about where do I want to spend money on television? You know, who's watching? What's the demographics of people who are watching? Data warehouse that I like. There's a bunch of them. There's an oligopoly of them. If you're not paying for a product, you are what's being sold. It sounds like everybody or most people know that. Like, so when you post something on transhumanism on Facebook, you get tagged as a transhumanist guy. Anybody that wants to go in and to talk to transhumanist folks, you know, they're gonna say, hey, look, give me a list of all the transhumanist folks. I cannot remember for the life of me who my data warehouse, L2. I use L2. If you looked, I bet you L2 could probably get you a list of people that are adjacent to the Transhumanist Party. Whether they're registered or not. They might choose to register as a Republican because they live in central or southern Indiana. They may choose to register as a Democrat because they live in Princeton, New Jersey or something. But they may share, you know, they may share your values. I think that could be an interesting place to expand networks. Actually going to a data warehouse and asking them, hey, what, you know, how much would it cost to get me a list of, you know, and of course, the bigger you want to go, you know, transhumanists around the world, and I want their phone numbers and emails, you know, that could get kind of cost prohibitive. But then if you're talking about, you know, hey, I want, you know, all the people that have a transhumanist lean to them in California, you know, that may be a little more digestible. And then does that fit in with a campaign plan or not? I don't know, but it's a source of data. Now,
are the government ones free?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
you could go on the
FEC. Pay
FEC.
like a subscription or something.
No, you don't have to do anything. No, you could go on the FEC website today and look up, you know, if you just want to go longevity scientist as the occupation. Now, a lot of people aren't going to say longevity scientist, but the ones that would call themselves a longevity scientist is probably going to be pretty copacetic with the world, with your worldview. You know, they'll put in scientist, you know, or whatever, or you'll learn kind of what keywords you're trying to rip out of here. And you'll come up with some theories and they'll be crap, and you'll come up with other theories and they'll be perfect and something to build on.
Yes.
But just have the courage and patience to engage and treat those as internships and campaign fundraising tactics.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much, Adam, for that response. You have given us a tremendous amount of insight today on the practicalities of running a campaign and what is realistically achievable. And I appreciate you coming on, sharing your experiences, and giving us some inspiration for what can be done in the not too distant future. So we, of course, continue to talk about these matters between ourselves, but I thought it was great to introduce you to our members, our viewers, so that they know who you are. And again, we really appreciate all of the input that you have provided. Ultimately, this is going to help us all to live long and prosper.
I know what that is, because my roommate is a Star Trek geek.